Howdy, y'all. Welcome to the Kentuckian. Glad that you joined us this week. I wanted to talk to you all for just a moment about Halloween, one of the strangest, if not the strangest holiday that we celebrate, major holiday that we celebrate in America. From unconventional origins to odd practices and even strange politics, although that's certainly no surprise today, what role does Halloween play in culture, in American culture, Western culture today? So I want to talk for a moment about the origin. Halloween is focused around a Catholic holiday called All Saints' Day. There appears to be a combo of several holidays from around this time of year for dating back centuries or millennia that have some similarities with the concept of Halloween that may have influenced it or may not have. You may be familiar with the Day of the Dead in Mexico, which is sometimes combined, especially in Mexico, although there are some cultural elements as well. You think about some Disney movies that have had Day of the Dead playing a prominent feature. But there are others too. I've read about a Roman one at least, and I believe there are several others, although this is not focused on that history. This time of year really often seems to be connected with the dead and spirits and that sort of thing in many cultures across the world, especially in Western culture. But that is another discussion altogether, one that is fascinating in and of itself. But to focus in, it has a little bit of an unconventional origin. Really, when you think about other major holidays in America, and especially the West, like Christmas or Thanksgiving or Easter, they have often have a spiritual origin of some sort and may be connected with other holidays as well, but definitely not the same focus that Halloween has with the dead and spirits and spirituality and other realms of existence and that sort of thing. I wanted to take just a second to remind you to like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts down below, as that really helps the channel. So it's kind of unconventional right off from the start, but it does have a little bit of that spiritual element. But there are often odd celebration methods. I mean, you think about Christmas and Thanksgiving and Easter, and there's usually pretty typical ways that people celebrate. There's obviously some variation, and I should say that we need to understand that the celebration methods of these holidays are a lot more standardized for many reasons. There's a lot greater centralization of many of the other holidays, like Thanksgiving and Christmas especially, and that doesn't occur with Halloween. If you go back 150 years and you look how Christmas was celebrated, if it was celebrated at all, the way it was celebrated would have been really much different than it is today, even though the traditional ways that it's celebrated today are fairly universal. There's a centralization and a unification of the celebration methods and the cultures involved in that hasn't happened as much with Halloween. So there's a lot we have to understand there. But understand that the differences would be more pronounced back then, and that's really, I believe, a large part of what's happened with Halloween. But again, the variations are massive, and perhaps more than they have ever been, if people celebrate it at all. And I recognize that there are a lot of people that don't do much for it. That's okay. You go from overly sexualized costumes and that sort of thing to trick-or-treating, right? Or you go from extreme gore in movies and decorations, just absolute excessive gore, to bobbing for apples and basic fall activities for other Halloween celebrations. There is such a huge variation. It's kind of odd. You have the whole spectrum. Some very, very wholesome celebrations, some very, very debased, and of course everything in between when it comes to that. And that's kind of interesting, and it's an interesting discussion of why isn't it unified, right? So there is a very disorganized, if you will, celebration of that holiday, and it varies so much, which is kind of odd. Why would it do that so much? And there's a moral element there. There's a commercial element because Halloween has been heavily commercialized, and you think about horror movies. Horror movies sell, and so there's merchandising related with horror movies and Halloween. Even if the horror movie isn't necessarily specifically about Halloween, that's a very consistent cultural thing when it comes to Halloween, horror movies, right? Or you have the scare houses and the haunted corn mazes and those sorts of things. And then there's the political side, and politics do have an odd grip on Halloween, although it's certainly nothing new. There's much talk about we're not supposed to appropriate cultural elements or cultures, right? Well, if you do something and you're taking that person's culture, then that's not right. Now, we've talked about that before in the Kentucky, and the idea that that's not right is bogus in and of itself, but I don't want to focus on that too much. We'll get off into the weeds, and this video will be way too long. But they talk about you're not supposed to appropriate cultures, not supposed to appropriate cultural elements. They'll talk about kids' costumes of an American Indian or something like that are actually evil. But then literal witchcraft and Satanism that's often connected with this time of year is supposed to be A-okay, and we're horrible if we decide to judge that. But again, they will demonize, no pun intended, demonize children for wearing quote-unquote culturally insensitive costumes. It's ridiculous. You're supposed to credit other cultures. You're supposed to recognize and value other cultures. But if you have the audacity to celebrate that culture by taking in a cultural element, then you're evil as well. And you get into the whole contradiction of when you're talking about leftism, you can't win, right? There is no winning. They're going to demonize you no matter what. And with the damage, the degradation that's happened to our culture, these cultural elements are so disparate and people don't know what to think. Because used to, even if Halloween wasn't celebrated the same way, and this is just an example, in every state or every part of the Western world, there would be some kind of standard. People, either they wouldn't celebrate it or they'd celebrate it a certain way, or it'd be very different from the way other people celebrated it. But you would have cultural standards that would unify the kind of celebrations that Halloween would have. You would also see that with Christmas or Thanksgiving or other things like that. And there's, again, several issues of why it is unified now, and it's not all good. But we need to understand that the reason it's so disparate and why everything seems so just all over the place with Halloween is to a large degree because of the cultural degradation that's occurred. And really, Halloween is an odd victim of this destruction and the destruction of American culture of any kind whatsoever. But it's an example of a battle, of a great war that's been going on, that's being waged right now. And it's a warning to anyone watching, right? That cultural war. And culture is important because that's what helps make us who we are, right? Culture is invariably and inextricably, connected with religion and morality, with values, with virtue, with the decisions that people make every day, with the kind of things that they're going to spend their time and money on, and what they teach their children. And this is part of that. Even if you don't celebrate Halloween, and that, again, no problem with that, that is part of it. And we need to understand and learn from Halloween whether we celebrate it or not. So what do, right? How do you take anything to gain from this? Well, choose what you believe, whether you're going to celebrate it or not, what you want to celebrate with Halloween. If you do celebrate it, what are you going to embrace as part of the culture? Make sure that you know the facts about it. Choose something that's virtuous and thoughtful, or not. You could keep it very simple and let's just trick-or-treating, or maybe you do something more thoughtful. Make sure above all that it's virtuous, to avoid the really awful debased things, and stick to it. Say, this is the decision we made, and you don't have a right to tell us how to celebrate this holiday, and then teach it. And that's an important part of culture as well, is passing it on to the next generation. You can do something the same way around your kids, and if you don't talk to them and teach them about it, they likely never will really truly pick up on it. Anyway, I hope that you found this interesting, maybe helpful, giving you some things to think about, maybe to talk about it at your Halloween parties or whatever. I hope that you all do have a wonderful holiday if you celebrate it, or a wonderful week if you don't. And remember, friends, as long as you and I are doing what's right, we make a real difference in this old world. Been Ryan Dalton with Kentuckian, signing off.